This panel is funded by the Council on Library and Information Resources.
I'm Brenda Flora, Curator of Moving Images and Recorded Sound at the Amistad Research Center. We're very excited to be joined tonight by Darrell White, Brad Lichtenstein, Yoruba Richen, and Richard Grant to discuss the work of filmmaker Ed Pincus and the Ed Pincus Film Collection at Amistad. Amistad is in the final stages of completing work on a project digitizing close to 90 hours of raw documentary footage from the collection, supported by a Digitizing Hidden Special Collections and Archives grant from the Council on Library and Information Resources, funded by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. The films will be made freely available for viewing online through the Louisiana Digital Library. Ed Pincus donated the collection to Amistad in 2002. It's made up of 16mm black and white film shot in Natchez, Mississippi in 1965 and 1967. Filmmaker Ed Pincus and his partner David Newman made 2 trips to Natchez. The 1965 footage represents the bulk of the collection. It was shot between June and September of 1965 and is the material that was used to create the documentaries Black Natchez and Panola. Black Natchez followed members of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party and the NAACP, charting their attempts to organize and register black voters. They captured the tension between the 2 groups, as well as the formation of the self-defense group, the Deacons for Defense and Justice. During this period, the car of Natchez NAACP President George Metcalf was bombed on August 27, 1965. Metcalf was severely injured. He had recently been promoted in his job at the Armstrong Rubber and Tire Company, which made him a target for white supremacist violence. The bombing brought greater national attention to the problems in Natchez and in many ways marked a turning point in local civil rights organizing there. Black Natchez followed this action broadly, while Panola focused on a single individual living in Natchez during this time. He discusses his living and working conditions and tries to make sense of both violent and nonviolent efforts to break down segregation. In 1967, Pincus and Newman returned to Natchez and shot 10 additional hours of footage for a planned follow-up to Black Natchez, which was never produced. They arrived following the murder of local NAACP treasurer Wallace Jackson, also bombed at the Armstrong Rubber and Tire Company in very similar circumstances to the Metcalf attack. Pincus and Newman tracked the community response to the incident and checked in with the subjects of the original documentaries. Today, we'll take a look at some of the unseen excerpts from this footage.
Huh? Let me get a picture with your sign. Flick me.
I asked someone to give us one of those good freedom songs.
All right, well, let's go. Come on.
I ain't gonna let nobody turn me around.
What's happening?
Say some white boys running that melon.
Time for that.
Say some white boys around his melon. Well, they didn't report the whole detail. It just
reported that the heck fella fake and this and that, you know. Huh? What kind of car? What kind of what? Chevrolet. What are you doing? Pulled up a pistol and told me to pull on the side. A 65 Chevrolet looked like it. What color was it? They have pistols? Maroon, yeah. Maroon? They supposed to, hey, that's what he say, hey. What he shot him in? Get back. Get your head. Let us side here. Let us side here. What's the matter? Nothing but some white boys with Alright, just a minute. I'm sorry. Y'all be quiet a minute. Hey, let's get back from the car. Let's get off the car. You got his tag number? Yes, I got one of them, but they're riding an old mobile and a... Do you know what color it is? That's a maroon. Let's get back off the car. Maroon Chevrolet? Let's stand back. What did they do? Get back. Can y'all got to film? What model? You know what model Chevrolet is? All right, let's go back now. That's 17255. Yeah. Is he shot green? No, he didn't come up with it. Who that James? Where did he go? Off Canal Street? Which way he went? Two riding together, separated. Two white boys? Two white boys. Who did he shot? Didn't he shoot nobody? Did the James? No, they was at me, but see, I don't buy nobody. Look, get him to go. Get him to go. Was it you that they pulled the gun on? Yeah, I did. All right, now look. I'll go with him to the station. I'll go with him to the station. Who called the man? I didn't see him. I just come here. Right. We want to clear the traffic. Let us out of here. Yeah. Look. Go on out. We'll get him. Could I have your attention, man? Could I have your attention a minute? Let's march back to the courthouse. Hey. Let's go back to the courthouse. Go on back to the courthouse. Just hold on just a minute. Watch it go. Hold it now. Hold it that. All right, let's go back on to the courthouse. Let's go back on to the courthouse. Can I go with him? Nobody wants to. Can I go with him? Back on. Back on. All right. Let's clear back. All right, now y'all open us up. Y'all back up there. Come on, back up. Y'all open up. Back up. Back up. Come on, car on now. Come on, back off. Come on around.
And now to introduce our speakers tonight. Darrell S. White of Natchez, Mississippi is the past Director of Cultural Heritage Tourism for the City of Natchez, as well as the Director of the Natchez Museum of African American History and Culture. He is widely recognized as an authority in African American history in the Natchez region and has contributed to many publications, pamphlets, reenactments, and programs. He was co-producer and narrator for the award-winning documentary The Parchman Ordeal, The Untold Story, and is co-producer for the upcoming film Women of the Struggle, Facing Fear in the Civil Rights Era. He works in partnership with New Dawn Video Productions and the Natchez Association for the Preservation of Afro-American History and Culture.
The city of Natchez, Mississippi has by far one of the most unique histories found anywhere within the state. The city was established first by the French in the year 1716, some 60 years before the signing of the U.S. Declaration of Independence, 60 years before anyone knew anything about a George Washington or John Adams or Thomas Jefferson. People of African descent were contributing to the development and the economy of what is the oldest incorporated settlement continuously existing along the entire length of the Mississippi. Now, that being said, there was also a very high concentration of free people of color there in the city of Natchez. The only place in the Deep South that would have more free people of color in one location would have been down in New Orleans. Those free people of color, particularly during the periods of Reconstruction, were primarily better educated, and those that were there led the foundation to a very strong and vibrant African American community. In the 1960s, during the top points of the civil rights movement, the city of Natchez was one of the few grassroots groups that was able to not only make demands, but have many of their demands met without federal intervention and without the support of the mainstream movement. The mainstream movement advocated peaceful, nonviolent resistance. But in Natchez, because of the threats posed to the community by rogue elements of the Ku Klux Klan, Natchez practiced armed resistance. There was developed there a chapter of the Deacons for Defense. I'm saying all that to say that when Ed Pincus and Newman came initially to Natchez to do some video recording of a freedom school, they found that the story there was far larger than they had originally anticipated. They were given unprecedented access to the inner workings of the Natchez civil rights movement. In the offices of the NAACP. They were in the offices and in the barber shop where the Deacons for Defense and Justice were incorporated and were swearing into membership. We know this because we have seen the footage that became available called Black Natchez. Keeping in mind that the technology in 1965 and in 1967, Ed Pincus was in Natchez, they didn't record things on a cell phone camera. They had bulky camera equipment and sound equipment, but they were able to go into those various areas and record. It was a tremendous find that there was some 90 hours of footage to be digitized. Our hat goes off to all of those involved in that project at the Amistad Research Center, because we now have another opportunity to look into and see firsthand what was going on in the civil rights movement. The Natchez movement, again, I'll say, made demands or requests. They also were so organized that you will see excerpts from in some of the videos that you will see in this program. You will see the numbers of people that came out to participate in protest marches and other activities that led to, again, Natchez being amongst the only locations throughout the movement to make requests and demands and have them met, and not having to utilize the federal government or the mainstream civil rights movement. They were victorious, but the mainstream movement did not want word to get out as to what they did in Natchez. Again, they were practicing armed resistance in the presence of the Deacons for Defense and Justice, where the mainstream movement advocated peaceful, nonviolent resistance. I can tell you that throughout my research, I never saw anything to indicate that there had ever been, let's say, the shootout at the OK Corral between the Deacons and the rogue members of the Ku Klux Klan, who I might add was so rogue that they were the Ku Klux Klan that the Klan was afraid of. They called themselves the Silver Dollar Group or the Silver Dollar Gang. And they were responsible for a lot of the violence that was perpetrated in the areas of the lower Mississippi Valley. So I am thrilled to be a part of this program because basically, I think of the other presenters, I may be the only one who had the pleasure and opportunity to meet with Ed Pincus when he came to the city of Natchez in 2009. He shared with me what was going on and how he believes his movements and actions actually benefited the civil rights movement. So what I can say in that regards to anyone who will be privileged to have a look at this presentation, to take note of what you're seeing and know that the 90 hours of film that have been digitized will be made available for researchers and for those who are really interested in knowing the truth.
You know the Mississippi River is still and cold. God comes over the water. It's still my body, but not my soul. God comes over the water. On and wade in the water. Wade in the water. Wade in the water. God comes over the water. Wade in the water. Wade in the water. Wade in the water. Our people on the mountain, over the hills and everywhere. Oh, tell it on the mountain.
So tonight, we're going to introduce to you and give you our acting president of the Natchez branch who will be presiding. In our organization, you know, we always have someone to take over when one of our brothers falls. So Mr. Jones is our first vice president in the absence of our beloved president, which I'll tell you about later on in the program. It's great praise. It gives me great pleasure to turn over to you, Mr. Albert Jones, who all of you know. Mr. Jones.
Everything gets stole, man. We gonna make a little check where that comes on the other side of the region. How about it? When we gonna do it?
No, man. Get another guy, man.
You want to check?
No, you can't check.
You can't. Oh, wow. Mandy said you can get a gun if you go get it. She got no way to go get it, though. Who? Mandy Lee? Where is it? Is that a house? She said she got Charles got one.
What y'all there?
I don't understand. I can get it. I can get it. Let me get it.
But we understand.
Look here. You know, let's the street go back down and back like that. You know that street, that alley go down on? Let's, check that out. Where? We're down on there. You go this way, then back over there, man. Okay? We'll be right back.
Yeah, what is it?
So on over. Got it?
Show it to him.
When the Virgin Islands moved into the Constitution in 50 place because we think we have a strange affinity for the Bible.
See, they got a bunch of cars up in there, man. Last night there was one there. Book the light, man. Give me a slate.
Okay, I turned the light on.
Okay, forget it.
I'm just trying to see how much film I have.
Okay, which
As far as this goes. There's another guy with it together. But don't turn that light on unless they tell you. You can. Shine it. Hey, come in.
Take a nice look.
I don't see it.
Back. 1, 5, and 6.
Anybody got a fence?
I know that old bag there too. That what? I know that. Huh?
That's the old cat that lives there. He ain't doing but drink. Go around making trouble.
Oh yeah. That's the one that you That's a known claim. You know that gray-headed dude, man.
Yeah, right around the ass in his car all messed up, then they tossed it off.
I already remember him.
It's like
Way over in Alabama, saying, telling the justice court that's what I was doing in Mississippi. Talking about they kidnapped somebody. And then they got to go around and try to apologize. We didn't kidnap nobody. We went in free will. No, they don't kidnap us. They have never had a warrant to arrest a Negro. They walk in and drag him out, feet first or head first. It didn't matter down with them. They got him out. Now it's just time out for that. And I want to tell the mayor of this city, and I want to tell the councilmen too, we just ain't going to take it no more.
Brad Lichtenstein is an award-winning filmmaker who has been making documentaries since 1998 and founded 371 Productions in 2003. He's been nominated for 2 Emmys and won 2 DuPonts. His recent film, The Jews Are Here, won a Telly Award, and he was nominated for a Peabody for his radio series about gun violence, Precious Lives. He is currently in post-production for American Reckoning with producer-director Yoruba Richen, a film about ongoing violence directed at Black people with a focus on unsolved murders from the 1960s civil rights movement era. 371 is committed to diversity and will soon launch Pipe Dream, a mentorship and career development fellowship for filmmakers of color. Yoruba Richen is an award-winning documentary filmmaker whose work has been featured on PBS, the New York Times Frontline Digital, New York Magazine's website The Cut, The Atlantic, and Field of Vision. Her latest films, The Killing of Breonna Taylor, premiered on FX and Hulu, and The Sit-In, Harry Belafonte hosts The Tonight Show, premiered on MSNBC, and is streaming on Peacock. She has been nominated for an Emmy, an NAACP Image Award, and a GLAAD Media Award. She is the recipient of a Clio, won Creative Promise Award at Tribeca All Access, and was a Sundance Producers Fellow. Yoruba is a featured TED speaker, a Fulbright Fellow, a Guggenheim Fellow, and a 2016 recipient of the Chicken and Egg Breakthrough Filmmaker Award.
American Reckoning started, believe it or not, 6 years ago, back in 2015. I had a conversation with Congressman John Lewis back then, really around a moment in time when he was approached by a former Klan member who had beat him during the 60s. And this man had asked for forgiveness from Mr. Lewis. And I had had a prior relationship with Mr. Lewis. I had worked for him as a high school student and stayed in touch all my life. And so we were talking about whether that would make an interesting documentary. And we explored it for a minute. And then eventually he and his staff pointed me to the cold cases, the cases from murders in the 1960s that were racially motivated, that were never solved and reopened by the Emmett Till Act that he introduced in 2007 and that passed in 2008. And so we started to pivot and want to tell that story. And once we started doing some research, we noticed that one of the cases, that of a man named Wallace Jackson Sr., had happened in Natchez, Mississippi, where there had been a film made by a filmmaker named Ed Pincus. And that film is called Black Natchez. It was shot in 1965. And once we looked into that, we discovered, lo and behold, that a lot of Wallace's story was captured sort of not directly, but indirectly in that movie in Black Natchez. And then once we became aware of the film, we got curious, like, where are all the outtakes from this film? And that's what led me initially, and this was actually before Yoruba joined the project, but led me initially to discover that the Amistad Research Center had collected or really was in the process at that moment of collecting all the outtakes from that movie. And then the biggest discovery was that not only did they have the outtakes from 1965, but that Ed Pincus, the filmmaker, had returned to Natchez the day after Werliss Jackson Sr. was murdered by members of the Klan by a bomb. So he had gone down in 1967 and started filming again. He filmed Werliss Sr.'s funeral. He stayed in town to follow up on different stories that he was telling. And suddenly we had this treasure trove of footage. So we knew that we had the opportunity to tell a film story in real time that took place in the past by using footage from a really talented, amazing filmmaker who was telling a verite story.
Yeah, I came into the project, Brad asked me if I wanted to collaborate with him in 2014, 2015, something.
2016.
Maybe 2016. And he told me about the you know, what the topic was, what the story was, and that there was this incredible archive of footage that had been rarely or never seen before. And I remember reading the treatment that he sent me and watching the small reel that he had edited already. And when I saw this footage, I was blown away. It was beautiful. It was to be able to tell a historical film by using, you know, the verite footage that was being shot at the time is such a unique position to be in, and such a pleasure to have as filmmakers. The other part that was in the footage is not just Werliss's story, but the story of the founding of the Natchez Deacons for Defense. I had been interested in the Deacons for Defense before this project. I became a little bit obsessed with them. And when I read that this was, when we talked that this was part of the story, I was, immediately wanted to be a part of making the film. The Deacons for Defense were an armed self-defense group that were actually all through the South, from Louisiana, all through Mississippi, and other places. And they're a little known part of the civil rights and Black freedom struggle. They were an armed self-defense group that fought back against white terror that was happening in all these communities. And in the footage, the Black Natchez footage, Pincus was able to capture the forming of the Deacons for Defense, and the players who led the organization. And I mean, it's just incredible. And we see their formation, and we see in this footage how they not only defended the community, but there was a boycott that the community initiated to demand desegregation in a number of industry, schools, and police, and et cetera. And the Deacons for Defense were the enforcers of the boycott, because they had to make sure that their own people did not defy the boycott, and so it could really be effective. And they enforced the boycott and made sure Black people weren't shopping in the stores and were not giving their money to the white establishment, business establishment. And that is how they were able to win desegregation in the city, because before that, the city rejected what they were asking for. So all of that is documented in the footage, and it's just incredible. So we're really excited to when this is aired and we can show what this beautiful footage documenting this little known story.
And what I would add, sort of like big concept that the footage made possible is, we are telling a story about a murder, but we wanted to make sure that we were telling a more complex and nuanced and textured story that didn't just focus on the trauma of the murder and the aftermath. And so by having the story of Wallace Jackson Sr.'s involvement in reforming the NAACP in Natchez, and his wife, who was one of many women who were part of the movement in Natchez. And we actually have this great footage from Pincus that shows one of the women who's a leader in the movement sort of calling out Charles Evers for not recognizing and elevating the women who were behind the scenes to a position of prominence when they were negotiating these demands that Yoruba talked about. And Wallace is part of the deacons, and we have his swearing in ceremony. What that all enabled us to do is to sort of avoid that trope of telling Black stories only from the vantage point, or primarily from the vantage point of trauma. And instead, we're really able to show the struggle, the resistance, the effort that was put forth by Wallace and his community to fight the violence and the white power structure that was oppressing the Black community in Natchez, which I think is a huge contribution to our field.
And I think it's a huge contribution to understanding, again, how the Black freedom struggle worked. I think we have the way that we tell the story is not full in terms of the violence that Black people face, like the actual violence that Black people faced during this time, and the terrorism that they faced during this time, which is all documented in this footage. And then also how nonviolence was, the myth that the civil rights movement was just about nonviolence, the MLK Gandhi approach. That is obviously one part of the movement, but there has been a long history of Black people defending themselves against white terror, and also in order to survive, but also how it's effective in terms of making progress, desegregation, et cetera. And I think that footage really shows how the strategy behind it, and why that's a part of how the gains that were made for Black people.
One of the things too that I'm reminded by what you're saying, Yoruba, is one of the things that really, I think, resonates in a contemporary framework is police brutality. And in the movie, we see scenes of police brutality, including an effort by the police and the white power structure to stop the movement by sending protesters to Parchman Prison and torturing them. And, when you watch that, you can't help but think about what we have been experiencing and seeing through body camera footage and other kinds of documentation. Really, in this country, it's never stopped. That's the point of the title, American Reckoning. But you think specifically kind of in this generation, 2012, Trayvon, obviously George Floyd, all of these instances of police brutality that we've seen did not, rise up out of nowhere. They're not aberrations. And this film and this footage really helps, put the evidence forward to make that argument. I want to also just say, first of all, I just want to say thank you to Amistad. We have been working with them since 2015, and even early on, before they had collected the footage and curated it properly. We were able to work with them to create a trailer and actually digitize some of the footage early so that, you know, these things cost money. We had to raise money early on, and they were really instrumental. And I can say with great confidence that Frontline is extremely excited. Rainey Aronson, executive producer at Frontline, has been so moved by the footage that she has reached out to Amistad, as you know, all the folks over at Amistad, to express gratitude. And we've reached out to the Pincus family and are, you know, expressing our gratitude in the way that we can with a credit, but also trying to really make it understood how special this footage really is.
Yeah, and I just want to say too that, you know, so much of African-American history in the, you know, during this time and before, and, you know, up until recently has been documented, hasn't been documented by us, by our people. That's starting to change. That has been changing. It's changing more, which is great. But it's really necessary for archive houses like Amistad, which you know Amistad is doing, but other ones as well, to give us access to that documentation and to that history, and you know, make it available for us, to use to tell our own story. So we're really again, extremely grateful that that Amistad is doing that, and hopefully other archive houses will, you know, do the same, because this stuff can be really expensive, it can be prohibitive, but it's our history, and you know, when we are able to access this footage, we get to understand our history in new ways, and in ways that are, I think, can be, you know, more complex, more nuanced, and also from our perspective.
And just adding to that, one of the innovative and I think, you know, sort of example setting things that Amistad is doing is working towards sharing all of this footage online so that it's accessible to everyone. And Yoruba and I have been working with a number of people, obviously, on this film, but one is a man named Sir Boxley in Natchez, who is a local historian, excuse me, Sir Boxley in Natchez, who is a local historian and activist, and who has been in touch with Amistad and has expressed gratitude for the fact that Amistad is putting all this footage up for the community to see and to share without editing. Obviously, we're editing and we're telling the story, but also the community deserves to be able to have access to this footage, and Amistad is doing that.
29, slate 1. Car's starting to flowing right now. Word is going around town. Yeah. I want to try and avoid people as possible. Maybe something else. I'm pretty fucking scared myself. Late 3:29. Back there? You mean where the blue Volkswagen is? I've been watching. Well, I hope you enjoy the park. It's a beautiful park. Oops, people starting to come in. comes a kid, I think it might be his dog. I don't know. Let's watch it. It's his dog. Okay, let's get together here. Greg, you're in this.
What you talking about?
Yeah, well, all of us have a vote.
Look, man, we all have a vote. Come on, shut up. Will you, man? We all have a vote. Who wants to stay? Who wants to stay here at Coast? What time is it now, Greg?
I'd say to wait around. My own opinion is to wait around about 10 more minutes.
So we can vote on it. Who wants to stay?
Coercion. About 10 more minutes, but I don't think we should stay.
Yeah. We can talk yourself, man. The longer we hang around, the bigger chance we have to get this shit. And if the baseball game forming up at that time and right now.
Yeah, it's trouble. That's trouble right away.
Right now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Leaflets about what? Okay, you ready?
Yeah.
Leaflets about what? Leaflets to put out leaflets that we've integrated the park and let everybody know about it. I mean, it's good to take tactical advantage of this right now because everybody, you know, we got turned back yesterday. That word's getting around. Now we get out there, put out the leaflets. We integrate the park. You saw that woman's reaction over there? Said, "The park's integrated? Oh, great!" You know, like that. It was really bitching. And so we get these leaflets out today. Let the whole goddamn town know about it. Then pretty soon we get these pictures developed. Maybe one of you guys can develop these pictures if you know how to do it or something like that. But if we get them developed, then pictures of these guys playing around on the merry-go-round, colored and white together, you know, on the merry-go-round, that'd be a great picture. Plaster all over the damn town, you know. Really be fine. Look, pretty little girl here. Really.
Know what's going to happen?
Nah, I don't say anything. Go ahead.
I'm just saying. I'm just saying.
Police.
What would happen if people really decided to go back out there another day and the white people didn't know about it? You know what I'm saying?
Well, I just say we go in groups like this now that we've done it once. People are going to be much less scared about going out there.
Lots of people going to go out now.
Maybe they time you there to go.
What you gonna do and how you gonna get out. Turn around. We're not back out. White folks.
Oh, let them turn around. Shit, we'll have the park for ourselves.
Yeah.
Would you like to write it up?
Why don't you all write it up?
Oh, come on.
Well, yeah, at least dictate it. At least dictate it. All right. No dictatorship, please. All right.
I'll get the dictation. Give me a slate.
Well, we got...
Richard Grant is an author and journalist currently living in Tucson, Arizona, and writing for Smithsonian Magazine. His most recent book is the New York Times bestseller, The Deepest South of All, True Stories from Natchez, Mississippi.
So, my name is Richard Grant. In 2017, I was in Natchez, Mississippi, researching a book that I would later call The Deepest South of All. And it was about the history and culture of Natchez. I was on a tour of African-American historical sites, and my host, a man named Jeremy Houston, started talking with great enthusiasm about the Deacons for Defense, which he explained as a kind of armed paramilitary group that was instrumental in the civil rights movement in Natchez, especially in 1965. In the Ed Pincus film, you can actually see how this group staged their first meeting and organized themselves. And I'd never heard of this group before, and I'd never heard of armed paramilitary civil rights groups before. I was familiar with the model of nonviolent protest. So I became very interested, and I asked Jeremy Houston if any of the members of the Deacons for Defense were still around, and he said that they were, but they had taken an oath of secrecy and that they probably wouldn't talk to me. Anyway, I kind of put the word around. I was interested in meeting some of the guys who Ed Pincus had filmed in this meeting. And a few days went by and I got a call, and one of the organizers, James Stokes, had agreed to talk to me in his house. So I went over to Mr. Stokes's house, Reverend Stokes's house, and he was 89 years old. in a wheelchair, but his mind was still good and his memory was strong. And I spent a few hours there interviewing him about the Deacons for Defense and about his life. He'd grown up as a sharecropper, one of 13 children outside Natchez. And I remember him saying that when the Great Depression was going on, they had no idea there was depression going on because it was just the same hard times and bitter racism as always. And his upbringing was dominated by clan violence. The clan are in the habit in that era of whipping black men with barbed wire and also of cutting off their penises. And he basically got out as soon as he can. At 17, James Stokes joined the army and he went to Europe at the end of World War II. And as he was singing in the choir in Europe, I asked him if he ever saw combat when he was in Europe. And he said, I'm just dig out his quote here. He said, "No, I never did, but the clan didn't know that and I wasn't about to tell them. The clan thought all the deacons were combat veterans and sharpshooters, and that's exactly what we wanted them to think. The truth is about 40% of us were from the army. The rest were older men who could care less about living or dying and knew how to shoot from hunting." So on the Ed Pincus film, you can see the main reason why the Deacons for Defense formed, and that was to stop the clan. I think the greatest concentration of clan violence anywhere in the country was in and around Natchez in this time. There was car bombings and church burnings, beatings, whippings, mutilations. There were 5 clan murders around Natchez in 1964. And just this powder keg atmosphere. I found an old FBI memo that the FBI thought that Natchez was more likely than anywhere else in the country to explode into a full-blown race war. And I asked James Stokes about this, and yeah, he said, "We were ready to go to war. We had plenty of guns and ammunition, two-way radios, hand grenades. We spread the message that if any more blacks were killed, we would kill 2 whites to catch up." The clan essentially, as James Stokes and the other Deacons for Defense saw it, had a bully mentality. And they thought that the way to back down the clan was to be aggressive with them, to stand up with them and to be armed. They totally rejected the model of non-violence. He said, "To us, non-violence was a sign of weakness and submission to the white man. Non-violence was letting the clan whip on us and police officers have sexual access to our wives and girlfriends." Now, this was a thing that was going on in Natchez. The cops would round up black men on Saturday night to get fines out of them, or if you didn't have the money to pay a fine, you could send in a woman and settle the problem that way. And of course, that produced a huge amount of resentment. And Stokes went on, he said, "It was our guns that changed everything. They were our protectors and we kept them clean and oiled." And in November 1965, James Stokes went on a fundraising tour to California, speaking at churches and colleges. And he kept quiet about the guns. He told people that they were raising money for uniforms and cars and two-way radios. And he came back with thousands of dollars that they spent on guns. He said we'd get them in pawn shops, pistols, .303 semi-automatics and ammunition. And they carried their guns openly in Natchez during the kind of the height of the civil rights unrest. And I asked him how the deacons got away with carrying their guns so openly. I mean, they were brandishing their guns. And he said, "We organized a hunting club with badges and insignia and registered it with the city. That was our cover. There was a clause in our charter that we were authorized to carry guns. We were hunting all right. And once the clan found out we were hunting them, they weren't visible like they used to be." So this was part of the civil rights strategy in Natchez was a boycott of the white-owned merchants, and that was another thing that the deacons did. If they found anyone breaking that boycott, they would rough them up, and they would also protect Charles Evers and the other civil rights leaders. And this threat of violence proved to be remarkably effective, in James Stokes's opinion, and in my opinion. In most of Mississippi, to get civil rights through required the federal government's help. In Natchez and the other models and the other places where there was armed resistance to the Klan and civil rights groups carrying guns, it proved to be much more effective. I asked him about whether they had actually used violence, and he talked about roughing up Uncle Toms, as he called them, who broke the boycott. And also he talked about a civil rights rally outside Natchez where white hecklers came and spat on people, and the deacons dragged those hecklers out of the crowd and beat them up. And for black people in the country outside Natchez in that era to see black men turning the tables and using violence against white men, he said it was just a sea change in the way they looked at things. He said it was an empowering sight for them. I asked him if they'd ever had to kill anybody, and he said no, because the Klan backed off. The Klan were afraid of the deacons, so they never had to kill any Klansmen. And then he remembered that they had killed a, quote, Uncle Tom, who had informed on the deacons. I asked him how many deacons there had been, and he refused to answer that question, because one of the strengths of the deacons was that they kept everyone guessing. People never knew, the Klan never knew how many people were in the deacons. I think it was probably about 40, but nobody knew for sure. Nobody knew whether they were all ex-army or not. They like to keep the Klan guessing. And then I asked him towards the end of our interview, when the deacons had disbanded. I had read that they had disbanded in 1967. He said, we never disbanded. We had a meeting on Thursday last week. So that he wouldn't tell me what they were discussing at the meeting, but that this group was still active. One of the things I noticed regarding the Deacons for Defense in Natchez is that they were revered in the Black community. When they were seen in public, people would come up to them and thank them for what they'd done. In the white community, almost nobody had heard about them. For a small southern town that's obsessed with its own history, white people in Natchez have got this strange amnesia, and they had no memory of the deacons at all, and very, very poor recollections of what happened during the civil rights era that Ed Pincus was there. There was very little memory of the Parchment ordeal, and almost none of the Deacons for Defense. And I think I've got a friend there, Regina Charbonneau, a white woman, and she was told by her parents that there was absolutely no conflict in Natchez during the civil rights era, that the city had peaceably agreed to all demands, and that had been the story. And it was really only in the last couple of years, largely through the efforts of Darrell White and some other activists in town, that white people even started to remember about the Parchment ordeal and the Deacons for Defense. So yeah, I must extend my congratulations to Darrell White for bringing this history to light.
Mr. White.
What I've learned from them is that there was resentment, but they did not know, the community did not know exactly how to handle it. As Richard alluded, they felt better saying nothing ever happened, that the people were not organized, that the community was not stepping forward to do anything. and that they started a model where as the general thought was everything was peaceful and harmony in Natchez. You know, it's ironic that Natchez was not the site of the working cotton plantation. It was a site of the townhomes of the wealthy cotton barons. So for years, they were saying things like, there were no slaves in Natchez, because the imagery of the enslaved were those from the working plantation. Natchez only had, you know, happy servants. And in fact, those happy servants and their descendants would stand up with something that they just could not accept. But there was no open, I would say there was no open challenges to the efforts of the deacons, because their brother would say it didn't happen.
Thank you.
Have you got me? Okay.
For Brad and Yoruba, how did you choose the clips that you included in the documentary? And you talked about sort of a verite story unfolding. Can you sort of explain what you mean by that for folks who might not know that term?
Sure. I mean, I'll start. It was really, when you're telling historical stories, stories that take place in the past, archival footage is always super important, right? Because you're really trying to bring to life what the you know, what the story is through the footage, through the visuals. We're in a visual medium. And I think what is so unique about this film is that we have it in real time, what happened, and that's very unusual. So normally with historical stories, you're using footage, you know, that maybe there's pieces of it that happen in real time. You're interspersing that with experts who can give you context. And with this film, we are able to show, because it was documented at the time, really the full story of what happened in '65. And then, of course, filmmaker Ed Pincus came back in '67 after Warless Jackson was murdered. And so he was able to capture the reaction of the family, the community, as it happened. So that's what makes it really unique. And so in terms of clips, that we chose the clips that would tell the story best, speaking through the footage. Yes, we have some experts as well, but this footage can tell the story. And that's what we mean by verite. So it's as it happens, not just, you know, having experts talk about it or even family members talk about it, which we do as well, but as much as possible to have the footage tell the story.
And Brenda, you asked about verite. It's just a fancy way of saying life as it happens. So, you know, we try to tell the story we don't use any narration. We try to tell the story as much as we can just through the people who are in the film.
Great, thank you. We have a question coming in the comments. It says, for the filmmakers, have you spoken with or searched for the children of the '60s who migrated away from Natchez? Our childhood memories and mistreatment of our parents and grandparents were terrible. They were not able to get jobs and to support their families. The fact that many are impoverished because they could only work in kitchens as cooks and domestics with no health insurance. And I see a lot of people in the comments echoing those thoughts of what a traumatic period it was in the 1960s and how that echoes today.
Go ahead, Yoruba. What were you about to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be kind of the next film and a very important one at that, to see the sort of reverberations of, you know, the trauma and the violence that the Black communities was you know, experienced. But I hope that this film will maybe be a part of that, bringing together the people who had to leave. We're now only talking about the history of African Americans being run out of towns and cities, and whether it was through mob violence, like what happened in Wilmington or in Oklahoma or many other places. And it's interesting, to talk about these cities and towns that were also where Black community experiences violence, and they left. I mean, that was the Great Migration, right? So I think that would be, hopefully this film will bring those folks together to come out and talk about why they left and what they experienced.
I just want to add that we do tell, since we're so focused on the story of Wallace Jackson and his children, we did interview one of his nieces, Cheryl Glover, who talks about leaving Natchez before her father was killed, and not wanting to come back because of the experiences she had early in '65, including thinking that she was going to lose her own life when she was driving with her uncle Warlist and Mr. Metcalf, George Metcalf, who was the head of the NAACP, and others, back from a meeting in Jackson back to Natchez, and they were being trailed by a truck full of white terrorists, and she was a little girl, scared for her life.
Question for Richard Grant. Is there a direct lineage between the Deacons and groups like the Black Panthers, or did they spring up independently?
I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know. I'm guessing independent, but perhaps Darrell knows.
Well, what I've learned is during that trip that you mentioned, Sir Boxley was the organizer of that trip to California.
Mm-hmm.
Small detail is that they went around to various churches and community centers in their presentation. They were in the city of Oakland. It is my belief, I'm still researching to try to find out exactly where they visited. Because if they were in Oakland, it was after the Deacons left out of there in '65 that Bobby Seale and Huey Newton decided that they would organize. Remember, it was the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. That's the same thing the Deacons were advocating when they were out there fundraising and collecting guns so they can come back and fortify the movement. So there may be a direct linkage between the two.
And can I just add that even, that's super interesting if there was that direct linkage, but African Americans have been, have had armed resistance since, the end of slavery and during slavery. So this is not a new thing of Black people taking up arms in self-defense. It's a part of our history that has not been told, that has not been emphasized for various reasons that we could talk about. But, I think that my understanding in, reading and understanding more about this, that these groups, are, have built on each other, were inspired by each other, even if there wasn't a direct linkage, because this has been something in our community because of racial terror, out of necessity, that we have, that we have had armed resistance.
I came across something in a history book the other day. In the 1600s, a bunch of enslaved people ran away from South Carolina, from the rice plantations of South Carolina, down to Spanish Florida, and they armed themselves. And when their enslavers came to get them, it didn't work because they had guns.
Absolutely.
That's very early example. That was from the 1680s, I think it was.
Absolutely. And slave revolts all through slavery, early 1900s, armed resistance groups that were, that were responding to racial terror. It's a part of our history that is not told, but is a consistent part of our history here in the Americas.
It's a big theme we sound in the film. We interviewed Akinyele Amoja, who's a professor of history at Georgia State University, and he makes a point that nonviolence in the tradition of Gandhi is really more of an aberration when you look across a whole spectrum of history of the Black freedom movement, which is not to discount nonviolence either, but it's to point out that this history is rarely shared and rarely told. And I think that goes back to what Yoruba pointed out, which is it begs the question of who's doing the storytelling, who's doing the history telling.
Mm-hmm.
Another question for Darrell White. In your discussions with Mr. Pincus in 2009, did he indicate if there was resistance to his presence and Mr. Newman's presence? And did he mention if there were individuals who smoothed the way for them when he discovered the existence of the Deacons of Defense and wanted to cover them more specifically?
I've learned that there was some resistance from both sides. The NAACP was not too happy about the fact that Pincus was in the office and documenting the plans and directions that they were taking here in Natchez. And there were elements of the white community that were highly incensed that a white man would be spending as much time with those people. I'll just use that term. There was an individual who had initially been supportive of Pincus and Newman when they were here in Natchez. He did end up having some emotional issues and took issue with both Pincus and Newman, and had pretty much publicly stated that he was going to do something about it. It wasn't until the same individual went and murdered someone that Pincus decided, both Pincus and Newman decided, we need to go underground. When Pincus came back to Natchez in 2009, he was very hesitant because he didn't know what he was going to be walking into, and whether or not some of those same folks who in his zeal to produce and present the facts as they were might still be around to harm him. But he did come. He spoke at a workshop that was sponsored by the Historic Natchez Foundation, and we had a question and answer period after the showing of Black Natchez and the role that he played during that period.
Do you see specific ways that the community games that were established in the 1960s in Natchez have carried over into present day? And I guess even more broadly, like regionally, how do you see the work that was done specifically by groups like the Deacons of Defense or by NAACP at that time affecting what's happening now?
The Deacons were able to put the Klan in check. When the night riders would come through the community, the Deacons would get on those walkie-talkies and say there's a truck coming through and the folks don't look friendly, and they get in their vehicles and go looking for them. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I don't recall there ever having been a literal shootout at the OK Corral. However, they knew that there would be direct retribution if they messed up. So it put them in check. When we did the project on the Parchment ordeal, no one wanted to even acknowledge that it had happened. They said nobody was ever sent to the penitentiary for walking down the street, because all they were said to have been doing was violating an ordinance that said no parading without a permit. In the early part of that project, there was a march where Blacks were numbered in the thousands. We have photographs that show that the same afternoon, the Klan came down Main Street in Natchez in full regalia. Okay, saying that we ain't afraid of y'all. But there was only about maybe 400 to 500 Klansmen, where there were thousands of Blacks earlier. Thousands of Blacks earlier, and the police were under the opinion that if those two groups were ever in the same place at the same time, they'd not be able to control what might happen. So they passed that ordinance saying no parading without a permit. That ordinance was later found to be unconstitutional. But I'll tell you, even to this day, as it was back in the day, Blacks were playing a significant role in the organization and the management of local government. That goes back to the period of Reconstruction, where the first Black mayor in the state of Mississippi was here in Natchez. Okay, there was a Black mayor, there was an integrated school board. The first member of African descent to serve in the United States Senate was from this community. So there's a long history there of progress by members of the community that even to this day, we're still eking forward in a positive light with specific individuals doing outstanding things.
I see someone asking, have you wondered why St. Catherine's Street is still so blighted, and that it was the Black Wall Street area of Natchez after Reconstruction in the early 1900s? Is that just something that hasn't come back, or do you think it still would?
I wouldn't necessarily say that the street is blighted. There has been a lot of construction taking place along the street. There were, I will say, there is a big vacant lot at one intersection, but that lot housed what was first the old Ace Theater, ACE, All Colored Entertainment. It was also the site of the community market, the Black-owned and operated store that people were requested or encouraged to go and do their business. And I guess those symbols of dominance from that era, once they went away, they were never, nothing else was ever put on that lot. Those structures were torn down. And I would say that, it's like Reconstruction was a 10-year period. But for 20 years, we had Lewis Winston to serve as city clerk. How many communities can say that for a 20-year period, Blacks were very instrumental in city and national government from one little corner in Southwest Mississippi? There's not too many of that going around. And have they not wanted to encourage it or be in support of it? That's pretty much why those areas may not have been fully developed, but there are plans on the books to at some point do something there to continue to advance and tell the stories of a community that paid its dues and is now worthy of the respect and admiration of the support given by the ancestors.
Thank you. I have a question for Brad and Yoruba. For other institutions that might have similar sorts of large film collections that we want to connect with filmmakers, what's a good way for archives to be better partners to filmmakers?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, documentary filmmakers are very connected to institutions like the IDA, the International Documentary Association, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts, groups like IDD, Independent Directors. I can't remember, but you can email me. I'll tell you, I'll link you to them. And the Documentary Producers Association and Sundance, PBS, ITVS. These are a lot of the institutions that we're connected to, and then there's an entire profession of being an archival producer, and there's a network of people who are always interested in linking up with collections that are interested in making their work available.
Definitely. I mean, I think part of it is just knowing what these archives have, because we start our project with like a deep sort of, expedition of where can we find this. And so I think revealing, what is in these archives, and doing that through, maybe it's panels with these organizations that Brad mentioned, letting it be known that, this is the art, these are the kinds of things that are being, the footage that's in these archives would be really helpful.
Great. One more question. We've kind of gone over this a little bit, I think, but it sounds like the deacons in Natchez, sort of their presence was what suppressed the Klan activity there. But do you think that their presence also made room for gains from the other groups that were working in Natchez at that time? Like, do you think that it bolstered the groups that were organizing peacefully to make their voices heard?
Yeah, I mean, they, enforced the boycott, which we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And they were, I think we find in, locally and also nationally that has to be, to win gains, there has to be multiple strategies, multiple people working in different ways to put pressure on the power structure. So I think you see that really, really clearly with the deacons and what they achieved in Natchez.
Thank you very much. Do we have any more questions from our attendees?
I was just going to add, a theme that is coming up a lot in the chat is, related to this idea of connections to Natchez in the past, and the way people have, lived since that time, and with some of the experiences of trauma and of terrorism. And in our film, you see two examples of how people have dealt with that. And I don't want to be a spoiler for the film, but Worless Senior's son and daughter, two daughters in the film, Deborah and Denise, and son Worless Jr., each have taken different paths to come to terms with what they experienced. And I just think it speaks to how powerfully this history is. It's very much alive for us right now. It's not something that happened way in the past and has no impact on the present.
Thank you for that. Any other final words from our panelists?
It's just to put something on your mind to think about. I recently stumbled across something that turned out to be a very valid fact. And it said, when Harriet Tubman was born, When Harriet Tubman was born, Thomas Jefferson was alive. When Harriet Tubman died, Ronald Reagan was alive. So that goes to say that it was not that long ago, and that the battle and the struggles continue.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. So I want to say thank you to Clear, and thank you to all of our panelists and everybody who tuned in tonight. Please visit us at amistadresearchcenter.org, and I hope everybody has a chance to explore the films in our digital collection at louisianadigitallibrary.org/Amistad.